Friends, I invite you to greet one another and settle into a seat. It's 9:15, and we're going to get started momentarily. I'm pretty excited about what's happening here. So, what we're up to today is to present to you the case statement for the feasibility study that's about to start. I'm going to tell you something about the folks who are guiding us through that. The case statement outlines the basic projects. These are kind of the building blocks. One way of describing the way that Calvary's buildings might evolve or learn to better support our ministries and our life together in the days to come. A favorite book of mine is by a guy named Stuart Brand. Anybody know who Stuart Brand is? Whole Earth Catalog, that crazy guy. He was a parachutist in the Army, kind of one of these most interesting people in the world guys. It's called How Buildings Learn. How Buildings Learn. And he goes and investigates all kinds of good buildings, and he insists that a good building is not a building that knows what it has to do at a point in time and plans for the future, because nobody knows what the future after a decade or so holds. A good building is a building that has adapted and learned based on how it's used. And there's a high road that he has examples of medieval cathedrals that have stayed put but also evolved based on the life of the parish. Timber frame houses are another high road. And there's a low road, which is basically a disposable building. He says there's a place for a building that has a short lifespan, but you need to understand whenever you do anything to a building, it's not going to stay that way. The uses will change, the needs will change, the neighborhood will change. And so that for me has guided for a long time how I understand what makes for a good building. It's not a point in time. So what will follow is we're going to have a few different people talk about different components, different parts of our buildings. As you know, we have three distinct buildings. We have a church that was built in 1843, although Charles would be the first to tell you if you or I walked into the 1843 structure, we wouldn't recognize it. Have a flat ceiling, right? We wouldn't have a chancel, or it wouldn't have the sanctuary back where the altar is. So even that high road building has changed. There's this building in the middle that's our parish house that has offices above, and the Great Hall as it is. This is a beloved space where we gather. And then in 1992, to the south is our newest building, So it's important, I think, going in for me just to say out loud, most of the most drastic ideas that we have about transformation are that building. It's the newest building, has probably the least historical. It's got rubber baseboards and industrial carpet, but it works beautifully for what it was meant to. So keep in mind that our project kind of works that way. We have the most freedom down here. We're tending most carefully to our historic structures, but we're going to talk about that. So I could talk all day about this picture, but I'm just going to point out one thing that I love about it. This is just the cover. That you'll be getting these materials in the mail and in your email. It just so happened, this is our gathering for annual giving this year. We stayed for lunch and went out in the parking lot and had a party because it's a pandemic. And when I looked at this picture, it's not just a great picture. You can talk about different things going on in the neighborhood. But I looked right here, and there's Barney and Jan Elam, and they're sitting right across from Wade and Mackenzie Schofield, who just came to town from Houston. So you've got a three-generation Calvary couple. They've got kids and grandkids here, and you've got people who just showed up. And Calvary is so committed to being together, fellowshipping, even if there's a pandemic. We just put chairs up in the parking lot. So I think all of this that pushes forward, we're talking about, those are the people, that's the Calvary that we want to create spaces to embrace and to spill out into the neighborhood for. In January, we had a meeting as well where we collected ideas, and they have really resonated with other things that we have heard before. We heard things like we want our life to be visible from the outside, issues of accessibility, open doors, sight lines for safety and to show vibrancy, green and garden spaces, was named. We come into from the back door right now. A lot of the things that we hear over and over again about what's good and what could be changed about our buildings, we collected those and added them to the wisdom that we've been collecting for several years now. Oh, that's the wrong one. I've got too many. All right, I guess you'll have to do it. Oh, you're going to do that. Okay. These things. This is Mika Vandersall and Aaron Weber Johnson. These are our consultants. They are a faith-based consultant group. We found them because Katie Owen, when she was parish administrator here at the time, said, Aaron was fantastic as we were assembling ideas for our last campaign. She was then at the Episcopal Church Foundation, and so she had moved over to work with Mika, and that piqued our interest. And when we interviewed folks, it was clear that this is a group that gets churches, they get ministry, they get that there's a moral and community component to these projects that maybe some consultants wouldn't be as familiar with. So we're really thrilled to have them leading us through this process, and they're holding our hands as feasibility happens. They're the pros who will be getting back with us and telling us how to assess feasibility. Yeah. So the first big area, as they described it, is making God's love visible in worship and congregational life. That's the first. There are going to be three components here that we're going to talk about. And we're going to start with the historic church. Charles Shipp is going to say some things. Remind you that there are concepts out there, but that nothing in what we're going to talk about has settled into a final plan. We're still in feasibility. We've done a lot of work, but we're still listening and we're still paying attention. So, Charles.
I'm the most historic
Right.
on the committee. Basically, the church space has not really been addressed since the mid-1950s. A lot of work was done at that time, and I think a lot of good work was done at that time. When one of our consultants, who is one who has worked on churches all around the country, including Trinity Church in Wall Street and All Saints in Atlanta, and actually did some consulting with Grace St. Luke's when they did their renovation. The first time he came here, he sat down in one of the pews and jumped up immediately and reached in his briefcase for his tape measure and said, I have never been in a church where the pews were so close together. He said, if you look at the ends of the pews, they're all chewed up and the finish is off because it's impossible to get past anybody. So one of the things that we want to do is to respace the pews a little bit. We'll probably lose a row or two, but in the process, we'll get a little bit more comfort. And if you've ever been seated on the aisle and somebody comes to sit in the middle, you just might as well get out into the aisle because they're not going to be able to get past you. While that's being done, the floors were refinished in the 1950s and haven't been touched since. So there are some things we can do to harden the floor a bit, which will improve the acoustics. One of the things we're looking at is accessibility for communion. In the 1950s, that wasn't an issue. Plus, we had communion once a month. Now we have it at almost every service. So accessibility is an issue, but it has to be done in a way that preserves the integrity and the beauty of the space. And we've got some thoughts on that. That same consultant has proposed a couple of ways that we can do that, that will make it look like what we want Calvary to continue to look like. So basically, the big thing in that area is the organ renovation on the left side. Kristen has nixed having a disc jockey. So we're going to have to do the other side. The one side was done during the last capital campaign, and that is the right side as you're facing it. but the left side's in pretty bad shape. So that needs some work, and that's a big component of the work. So acoustics, pew spacing, accessibility, and the organ. That's what you'll see in that part of the construction.
And I think to make sure we get through all 6 components, we're going to go on through, and we'll have some time for conversation at the end. David's going to talk about this building.
All right, so you've made it through a fantastic service, and now you want to try to get to the rest of the building. And how do you do it? You go either through the tower, the bottleneck that is the tower and the bride's walk into this room, or you go down the chute past the organ the other way. So like Charles was talking about, accessibility is key, and flow in this building and to this building is key. The hope is that the courtyard opens to the bride's walk. The bride's walk itself is enlarged. There would be a ramp from the sidewalk up to the church doors, again for accessibility, ease of everybody getting there, and a wider bride's walk connecting straight through almost where I'm standing to the new building. So the flow and the organization much more simplified, broader, easier to navigate. So think through some other things. Montgomery Foyer is the room behind me, and you know that it's down 6 stairs and nobody can get there who has any issues with mobility. And then there's this room, the rector's study, and I'm never sure where the apostrophe is supposed to go, whether it's before the S or after the S, and especially when it's called the old rector's study. At any rate, that room has no way to get there if you have any mobility issues whatsoever. So think of the Montgomery Foyer being raised onto the same level as we are right now. So as you're going through an enlarged bride's walk, you might be able to go to the right into Montgomery Foyer for meeting there, or left into this room for a meeting here, and then your access straight into the 1992 building. So simplified, making the layers all the same. Likewise, on the other side of this, the passageway by the bathrooms would be enlarged and simplified back where John Jones is standing right now to direct people much more easily up toward the organ entrance, the chute to the church. So in a nutshell, that's this floor in ideas. And then there's the office level, which is, if you've been up there, one long runway of offices. Right now, it's probably overused and underutilized, perhaps. So in the current way of thinking, it might be mothballed and made for future use. There's also the third floor directly behind us, which has youth rooms as well as choir vesting. That all needs to be made less of a warren of little rooms and probably become 2 big either youth rooms or Sunday school rooms of some sort. So those are the ideas for using this space. And with that, who's up next? Scott, you're next.
Related to, David covered a lot of this. We teased out as one important component just attention to how the 3 buildings get tied together and how flow moves between them. Some of that will be here. Some of that's this idea that if we had a ramp to a expanded bride's walk here in between the 2 buildings, flow can happen all the way around. And we're going to talk more about how that can flow all the way out to potentially a new plaza to the south where the staff park right now. So I'm not going to go too far into that. I'm going to roll it over into the second big category, is making God's love visible in community. So 3 potential projects that could help us think about community life. One of the statements we heard was, we are not only invisible to our neighborhood, all the life, last time we were talking, all the life that goes on in here could be completely invisible to our neighborhood and it to us. Also within this building, great things can be going. I can be in my office and you can run a whole waffle shop and I'll never know about it unless I decide to make a trip down there. So, So as I said at the beginning, the deepest renovations are going to happen here. And I'll tell you way back, right before the pandemic, because we were just starting to try to get concepts together, right? The thing that changed, opened up our imaginations was the architect's question, what if orgle room? You all know what the orgle room is. It's right on the other side of that wall. You have to have a good sense of direction to know that the orgle room is right on the other side of that wall, but it is, and it's a 2-story atrium in the center. And it's mostly used for Calvary Place's playroom. So they saw this vertical connection. And if we came in from the south and a vertical connection in that building allowed you to step in, see a stair that goes up to the second floor, a wide passageway would bring you to the church here, a wider passageway would bring you to the church and into the close here, the garden here. All of a sudden, navigating these 3 very different buildings built in 3 different times becomes a little more intuitive. Just the idea of how can I visually come in and realize where I am in the space. So while it's not settled exactly what that room would look like or what it will actually encompass, that concept really freed us up to think about how this whole education and music building, we're calling it, might evolve. So a few components. That's the new entrance that would flow from the outdoor plaza, and Andy's going to say something about that in a bit, and an open stairway concept coming in so that we know where we are in the building. So some of that space that would be taken up would be what's existing children's spaces. I don't know if you know this. How many have, there are a few parents here who have little kids. Do you realize, those of you who don't have little kids, that if you're in Calvary's church and you leave your child in the nursery, you will have, if you're a visitor, you will have to have someone take you by the hand to the place where your child is. And if you start them there, and then if you get to church, if you got to go back, they're going to have to take you by the hand and go back to the other place. That's not optimal if you're a parent. I think that's fair. So one important priority is on this level, if it's at all possible, how do we get the nursery on this level? And then how do we get maybe those youngest kids, their classroom on this level, so that we could have a room designed for, say, children's chapel every Sunday, that both is a Sunday school room for them. Then maybe the next floor, as David said, could be the kids move up. Jeremy liked the idea of the kids moving up a little bit. And then maybe the end of the 4th floor could be a great youth suite, since they're trying to get away from us anyway at that age, right? Crook Auditorium Choir Room has beautiful space, but they also are right now being creative as to how they use that space. They have square footage, but they actually get vested up here on the 3rd floor, so people who might have to go up and down to get their vestments on, there can some ideas as to how the choir space could be more efficient, so they don't have to make so much trekking and so much mileage. And it was... And their offices and restrooms, we would like to make Kristen's office more accessible. We'll just have to see. There are going to be some things we can do, some things we can't do, but we want to make all that space work as well as it can. Those are just some identified priorities. We also want to make sure that there's ways to host small and large events. We heard both. We want intimate spaces and also be able to flow around. And some of those will be in common spaces. Think Crosstown. The common spaces are some of the most inviting and invigorated spaces. Okay, we're going to have Margaret. Margaret's going to say something about kitchen outreach dining. And again, think of these as blocks. They're not all fleshed out. There's some pictures we showed here in January to give you a sense of where areas of attention might be, and she'll say something about why we might have those at the same.
Thanks. So I am now your basement specialist. All of us in this room come to Calvary because of what happens right over there in the sanctuary. But some of you may not realize that there are thousands of people who come in and out of the Calvary basement all year long, year after year. Some of them are members of Calvary and they worship here. Others may be members of Calvary, but their church is basement church. Others may never come up here. They don't go to church, or they go somewhere else. They come to put a dollop of mayonnaise on aspic. They come to help stand in the alley on Sunday mornings and count the homeless people and direct them through the warren of whatever place they need to go, way back down this little twisty hall. They come to waffle shop. They come to all kinds of things. And so while the basement areas of the kitchen and the mural room aren't going to be changed a tremendous amount, there are a lot of opportunities to straighten out the hallway. I mean, now it has a ramp and an angle and another angle, and it's about this wide. There's closed closet activities that needs to happen. It's hard to get people in and out of there. And these are people who need clothes. This morning, a man was outside who had been sleeping on the streets all week. This is the worst week of weather I've ever experienced in Memphis. He was soaking wet. He needed clothes, but somehow, he was guided down there, and he got what he needs, and I hope he'll have a better week. But for a lot of people, the basement is the place that people know about Calvary. Over the years, Calvary's made the basement work, just like Scott said. It's constantly evolved, maybe evolved from one week to the next, one season to the next, from non-pandemic to pandemic. But we've made it work. So I think now we have an opportunity to straighten it out and make it work better for the near future, maybe for the long-term future. Who knows? Who knows what opportunities will be presented to Calvary to make more of God's love visible in our neighborhood. So it's more about the flow and freshening up. The kitchen, as far as I know, is pretty much unchanged, but with better flow. People just need to know where they're going and not be confused by a lot of doors. There's so many doors in this place that go into some narrow little space, but all of that needs to be straightened out to just update us for whatever might happen. I think Calvary has great bones, a great location, great people, great opportunities, and if any of you were in church at 8 or will go next, you will hear one of the last lines from Paul's sermon, that transfiguration happens at the ground level. And, from the ground up, Calvary is a bottom-up church, and we have a real opportunity to work together and make it better.
Something else I'll mention before Andy comes up and talks about outdoor spaces is that for about 3 years now, even though we haven't been able to talk about it till this week, our vestry and the Calvary Place leadership have been in conversation about their next home. And they're announced to their parents that they are going to be moving to St. Mary's Cathedral, which I think will, if you all know St. Mary's, our beloved cathedral, is in a difficult time, and so we are excited that maybe this life will really help energize them. And Calvary Place has started engaging the broader medical and business community about the serious need for child care, much beyond what one little church down here can provide. What that allowed us to do 3 years ago is to begin thinking, when we started this process, if that weren't there, our buildings could work differently. So one possibility in that same first floor is that staff offices could be down on the first floor, so we have more people and eyes to keep the building safe, because it's not just one person down at the door. So that's another element in this other building, is bringing staff down closer to the first floor. Andy, you want to come talk about plaza space? I love that very first slide that outside in the parking lot indicates how much we would like to have great green spaces and outdoor spaces.
Thanks, Scott. And sorry, I have a cold, not COVID, and I have tested. The way Scott gets me to come to Sunday school is he makes me speak at Sunday school. The biggest issue, I think, with the outdoor space is, number one, it's our welcome mat. And we've all discussed it at length, and David has led in a big way, including cornering all of us. But it becomes your entry, and it becomes what we hope lifts people's soul as they comes to church. And an enormous challenge we've all said repeatedly is we don't have good flow. You keep hearing not good enough flow, confusion. And what is our front door? And I believe the logic for this becomes two things. One, it is your front door and what becomes a much more obvious entry. And it's a mixture of being pragmatic and also spiritually uplifting. But while doing that, having an outdoor space that can work to meet. One comment we've said repeatedly, outdoor spaces are incredibly important, incredibly attractive, but Memphis can be 180 degrees in the summer and -2 in the winter. So you have to be realistic about an outdoor space. And one thing that I think we all need to be considerate of is you don't want to create an outdoor space that looks like a parking lot because nobody uses it. And the good news of all of this is that technology is with us, and great designers like Charles Shipp and art dealers like David Lusk can help us create that space in a way that we're going to use it. So that'll include everything from shading to heating elements, and all of the different options there have grown dramatically. One other thought I'll be quick on is we've also talked about how do you make that space to suck people in, and including if they're not coming to Calvary, they didn't know they're going to come here, but they are downtown and they hear there's as an example, and I'm not committing us to this, but a huge water feature or an attractive piece of art that's water. So both noise and visual that brings you in and you want to see what this beautiful church is, both the gorgeous traditional part of the church and what will be effectively some modern architecture tied into it. But I personally believe that can be incredibly dramatic so that you now have a reason when you come to the church, you really understand that there's been a thoughtful entryway, and it really does get you thinking as you come into the church. Did I do my job? Okay. All right, I'm going home. Everybody have a great day.
So that plaza area, the staff park, right down at this end of the building right now, there's gates that let the staff in. If that could be captured for a spacious, welcoming entry. Of course, when we started just these conceptual ideas, is that a redundancy? Is that a nonsense thing? 100 North Main didn't have a future. So it's kind of lovely to think that as we had tried to start thinking about how we could turn toward our neighborhood's turning towards us. It's looking like Billy Orgel and Kevin Woods and some folks are going to help bring to life this blight that's been across the street from us. And so all the more reason for us to be able to engage our neighbors beautifully. Other component with that, of course, would be the whole block. And this is kind of blocked out here if you want to peruse it. We showed those last time as just general concepts. Is we want to attend very intentionally to the area where the market, the Nathan Bedford Forest Slave Market was, and there will be a specific attention to that. How do we both commemorate and offer it to the city, a space that tells the truth and invites people into some sort of contemplation with that reality. So again, these are areas that we've identified as important. Some concepts have begun, but mostly they're these blocks. And now as we move into feasibility, we'll have to align those with what we hear our capacity is and what the energy is around how we actually live into those. So here's a timeline. Organization with the Vandersall Collective happened in January as we tried to bring ideas back online. In February, we've been working to finalize the case study, which this is, and a mailing list and a subset of interviews. They interview a portion of the congregation with a longer interview on the phone. It would be in person, but it's on the phone or Zoom. But all of us will get a full description of what we're kind of running through today. with some questions to hear back from every single person who's ever participated in the life of Calvary financially in any way. So you'll be getting those materials probably in the next week or so, both in email and paper. In March, so that's in March, the case is mailed to the congregation, interviews conducted. March 28th is the deadline for all of your surveys to be submitted. These are completely confidential. Vandersall Collective will be the people that will be receiving your surveys. And then after the 28th, they will analyze the data, and they will come to the vestry meeting the third Tuesday in April to present what they've found. And after that, we will turn back to the congregation and present what they've found to you and start that discernment and say, how do our goals align with our capacity? And we've penciled in, at least right now, so watch your communications. March 1st, that Sunday, May 1st would be a Sunday where we could gather again here and have people in person to talk about what we heard back from Vandersall Collective. So that's the date right now especially is that March 28th, but it'll be all over the materials you get in the mail and in your email to let you know when you can get your input back to Vandersall so that we know. They put up a few, I got my notes here, frequently asked questions that Vandersall, they've been through this a time or two. These don't need to exhaust. We're going to have time for some other questions from you as well. Is it a foregone conclusion? Is one question they get often. No, it's not. They're really clear that they understand congregations, and the only successful campaign is a campaign that aligns with the values and the vision of the congregation and doesn't strap them down with something they can't afford or don't need. So we are listening seriously during this feasibility study to see what's important to the congregation and what we can do. What was the process that led to our congregation considering a campaign? We talked more detail about that last time, but basically in 2016, a feasibility study was undertaken, but because of some staff changes, that was determined not to continue at that time. That information's been folded into these priorities. As I said last time, the last two campaigns that did not go forward because of feasibility study for different reasons were successful campaigns. They weren't failures. It was successful discernment on the behalf of the congregation that we're pushing ahead and we're going to do the next right thing to do. There were good reasons to say it wasn't time. So that's the same process we're entering into. In 2019, as I mentioned before, is when conversations began with Calvary Place that allowed us to think in different ways than we've been able to in the past about our buildings. And we formed a small master plan exploratory committee, a group of about 35 folks, met a couple of times with all sorts of relationships with Calvary and expertise, from 17, I think, to 84 in age, musicians, worship leaders, to try to get a sense of what priorities were, as well as meeting with ministry leaders and staff, and just try to glean all the wisdom we could. And so in the past few months, we're bringing that back online after, maybe you know, we had a pandemic when things kind of went on pause for a year. When will we find out the results? I think I just said that. The deadline to get stuff in is March 28th, and then at that vestry meeting, look at the end of April for the response to you. Question, what if there's support for the campaign, but the potential total raised isn't, we haven't said this out loud at this meeting, $15 million. That's the initial concept, our blue sky, bold concept was estimated at $15 million. They said clearly if it is more or less than that, this is the time of listening to say, how can we live into the values and the vision that we have identified given the resources we actually have at our disposal? And we'll be faithful to that. So we are listening, and that's intentionally designed as much as we could, but not beyond where we know we'll go. So that design work will continue based on what we hear back from the feasibility study. Has the Vandersall Collective ever not recommended moving forward with a campaign? Yes. They know how to tell a congregation the truth. This is not the time in your life for any different reason. That's one of the reasons we trust them. What would the pay period be for our pledges? They get into the weeds here a little bit. It's typically 4 years but we'll arrange with folks if we know in advance for that to be longer if it needs to be. And what's the last one? Oh, I like this one. Would a capital campaign pledge count the same as an annual campaign pledge? Aren't they going to the same place? I mean, I think the short answer of that is it's a little bit like saying, you know, maybe this year I'm going to build a house instead of buying groceries and paying my light bill and my kids buying clothing and stuff. Calvary's still going to be Calvary year in and day out. So please don't just move that annual pledge over to the capital campaign. This is a sense of abundance and a bigger picture project. So those are two distinct things. And Vandersal will help us keep that in mind as we discern what our capacity is as a congregation as well. When would solicitation, oh yes, okay, when would solicitation be? So if the feasibility study says there's great energy and capacity going forward, the earliest would be that things this summer could begin to get started with regard to the capital campaign and prepare for a campaign in the fall. If we hear back, no, we need to move several parts around, and we will arrange the time frame to do the work we need to do to end up with the project we need today, given our life in Memphis. Okay, I don't remember what the next slide is. You're invited. Once more, deadlines for responses are March 28. That's a lot of information that you will all get in a form that you can sit down at your kitchen table and look at it, but we wanted to do it in a public place, in a public forum, so that maybe you could ask some questions you might have. We have some time here. We rushed specifically for the purpose of saying out loud what the components are in a way that we could have some time for you to offer questions that you might have, or comments, or... Yeah, Laura.
I have more comments than questions.
Okay.
First, I just want to say thank you. You all that have been working behind the scenes have put so much thought and prayer into thinking about how we can make God's love more visible to ourselves as well as to the greater community, which is really exciting. And Andy, I was so pumped to hear you talk about a sculpture piece, because that's something I've been dreaming about ever since we even started dreaming about what we could do with the parking lot and what people see. And Margaret, I was appreciating how you talked about how people experience Calvary in different ways, like in different parts, like and even outside. But I just wanted to spit this out so that I get to say it. But a sculpture that has water features to it, that pulls in our place here in Memphis with the Mississippi River, that pulls in our baptismal covenant and how we're baptized with that renewal, and then that new life that comes and the healing that comes with water, I think plays such a significant role in everything that we've been talking about. So I'm so thankful that that's a part of what we're discussing.
I can get you to say that from the pulpit, Laura. That's beautiful.
Would construction start in advance of getting what you're anticipating to be the full amount? I mean, can you start a little bit, or do you have to wait until you get everything in before you can work?
That's a good question. Typically, there is built into the cost a construction loan. So what that allows you to do is to, once you have commitments from folks, there's wisdom all around how you can start the structure on the promise of payment, because Calvary, year after year, our pledges exceed our estimates, basically. So Calvary, the people give a little more. So we have a great track record to say when we've said that we're going to support in this way, we will. So the construction loan would be a bridge loan for those 4 years. We don't know the time. You know, again, since we do not have architectural drawings, we have concepts that are, you know, we can do prettier back of napkin things now because we have computers, but they have not determined where all these things are going until we actually get this wisdom back. So there will be a design phase after we hear feasibility's done, this is what we can do, now let's design to this number. Yeah. Yeah, Andy.
I should have, and Scott, I'd asked, but I think everybody here would want to know, and maybe you've said it and people do know, but more a little bit about the designers, because we have two we really are lucky. We have two great architects in the room between John and Charles, which puts a lot of pressure on them, by the way. And then David on the art side. I mean, so much talent is here and has already had a lot of input. But you may want to, if you have 2 seconds, talk about the design team.
Sure.
And kind of what they're about, and then some of how that was through you and David's leadership primarily, how some of that has been modified as you've thought through things.
Sure. So the first group we pulled together was Charles, because I think it's in our bylaws that you can't have an architectural project without consulting Charles Shipp at Calvary. Institutional wisdom and just wisdom. And John Pruitt was the head of the Building and Grounds Committee. We have lots of architects in this, lots of talent in that, which is splendid. And then David Lusk, I wanted to bring in from the art side. Margaret Craddock. What did you just say your newest addition to your resume? Basement space. That's like the 34th point on Margaret's Calvary resume. And that fall we said, it was Charles who said, I've been there before. We don't want to hire a firm that one of our own works for. I think you were that blunt, just to say it's difficult for the person, difficult for the conversations and whatnot. So what they actually asked was, I wonder if there's someone out of town who could come over and help us collect our ideas. And so a group from Little Rock that I knew of, we said, well, let's have them come over and take a look at these things and give us some concepts. I think what we didn't expect was the first architects think in 3 dimensions. And so the first idea was this, what I've described about the Oracle room becoming a connector space to bring the buildings together. And the group was so intrigued and engaged by that concept, they asked Heron and Horton Architect, a small firm in Little Rock, to continue with the design work. And the vestry agreed back then that we would work with them as our architects. So it wasn't a chance. I promise I didn't bring them along from Little Rock, and I'm not getting a kickback from them. It's a process that led in an unexpected way. Was that all the pieces of yours? Yeah.
Thank you. I was just wondering, has there been any talk about sustainability and how that might be built into this plan?
Yes, great question. And Matt Seltzer has been one who's worked specifically. We haven't gotten to the bones of it, but we have identified it. Sustainability has to be built in. We did a lot of replacement of our mechanical systems a few years ago, which is really good news. So there are some things that are more efficient than they had been. We don't have any radical components built in what we redid. But sustainability, both in the construction process itself and in how spaces are used and heated and cooled and all of the things, has been on the table. Another piece of that that's been identified is as we're coming out of the pandemic, that airflow and exchanges and spaciousness, and there are new things brought into our consciousness to make for healthy buildings. You know, sick building syndrome is something that a few decades ago we started realizing, and we see our buildings often don't attend to the air quality. Well, we've kind of returned to that concept as far as just a good environment, a healthy environment for our buildings.
Let me speak, and I think it's adaptive reuse also. What we talked about is not very much building of new walls or of new spaces, but it's reusing what we have. We've got lots of square footage in the building. Like Scott's first comment from the author. We just need to know how to use them at this time and going forward.
Other questions, thoughts, reflections from you? It's remarkable. Oh, yeah. Pat. Thanks, Pat. Bill.
It's all pretty exciting. Now, what is happening with that building over there that was vacated? Because I heard...
The hub building?
Yeah, there was something going to be happening over there.
Great question. So the hospitality hub moved to a terrific new location. They're building bigger now, but they started a plaza over on Washington Street. Go check it out. If you want to look at some folks who take outdoor spaces seriously in serving our most vulnerable neighbors, they wanted to make a beautiful place where people want to be and gather. as we all do. So that opened up this space. We got PPP money during the pandemic, and the vestry committed as soon as we got it, because we didn't know what the future held, that if we, as Calvary, emerged from the year, I don't remember what the years are now, 2020, and not having needed that to cover payroll, we decided not to send it back to the government. That was supposed to be funny. But we did want to send it out into the community. If we have resources that were helping us plan and be safe and keep people hired and make sure we didn't have to lay people off, it ought to go back out into the community. One of the primary places we identified was when the hub moved out. That building was in pretty bad shape. It needed to be made sound. But there was also a need for places like Room in the Inn, where congregations might have volunteers but don't have space to host a group. So we got in the process of, let's get folks over there, let's replace the HVAC, let's get the roof to stop leaking, let's patch the floors, and let's even put a few showers in the middle. Not committing to the long-term use of that building, but there are needs right now that we could be sharing that space, both for our own outreach ministries and for other folks in Memphis. So we hit a glitch, because I don't know if you've had any construction projects during this time that might have not stayed on schedule. We had to glitch with some, but we're back online. We have the permits, and folks are getting, in the next couple of months, we think that'll be available to folks doing good work and ministry in downtown, both from in Calvary and outside Calvary. Longer term, we don't know, but that's a piece. For instance, again, if we talk about these building blocks, we didn't set aside resources to decide what that building's going to be. But it was noted that the hub, that space, could be the vestry at one of the important moments in this, a vestry retreat at Crosstown, said that could be an incubator space for something important that downtown needs. Something. We don't know what that something is, but we kind of held it out as, what does the community need? What would enliven the plaza itself too, doing good work in downtown Memphis? And again, all that was before we knew we might have actual neighbors who were legally living in 100 North Main. So yeah, a lot of possibilities for the hub building as well. We don't know what those might be. Yeah, Jean.
I just want to say, in terms of incubating wonderful things,
Yeah.
and you mentioned going to see what's going on there. You may, if you are interested in seeing what's going on with the hub and the new construction, they're now having Thursday 4 p.m. tours for interested individuals to come and see the exciting construction underway.
Jean said there are 4 p.m. Thursday tours at the Hospitality Hub over on Washington Street to see where they are and what they're doing. They've got tiny houses over there, friends. They are so cool with little, they must be about 80 square feet, but they had a need to say, I've got this person trying to transition into housing. I don't have a stopping point for them. Well, let's build one and put them in our parking lot and get these 90-day, 100, I don't remember, Will, you probably know the date, the span of time that there's need to, those are creative people that are our people, really important to us. So Thursdays at 4, you can check out what they're doing. Kelsey and his crew is just doing great work. We are here, another reason to have a variety of people present some of these components is that there's a lot of wisdom. You may want to approach one of us with more questions. I'm available. I'm part of the reason, a big part of the reason Ardell and I were attracted to the crazy idea of leaving a job I loved and to see if I might be called over here was because Calvary was paying attention to its neighborhood in ways that got beyond the brilliant outreach work. They went deeper. Margaret was asking, what's going on with blight around here? Tim was asking, what's the story of Nathan Bedford Forrest on the block? Deeper systemic questions, which also turn around to say, how can the systems and the structures of Calvary better support the engagement we have with our community and with our neighborhood? We didn't know that, we didn't know that our neighborhood would be turning some corners in ways. We were ready to turn toward our neighborhood before we knew our neighborhood was turning toward us. And now it's just a great joy that we might have even more to turn toward and be faithful toward and be excited to engage in downtown Memphis. Thanks for your attention and input. Thanks for y'all online. Again, this is a piece that we captured, so you'll be able to return to it and look for in your inboxes and your mailboxes and all your boxes for materials in the days to come. Thanks so much.